Hello and welcome to Making Known the Unknown, obtaining your passport into forever. I am your host, Tina Tarryk, and with me are my regular panel of experts, Sidney Schwartz, middle school teacher and Bible researcher from Hackensack, New Jersey. Welcome, Sidney.
Hi, Tina.
And Reverend Hewitt, founder and pastor of Gifts of the Spirit Church in Chesterfield, Connecticut, and medium. Welcome, Carl.
Thank you.
And welcome to all of our viewers. Just a reminder that we will be live this entire hour, 889-1728. Don't be shy, give us a call. And before we do jump into that hour, we have a little clarification that we would like to share with you, which for those of you out there who are not familiar with what it means to be a medium, like Reverend Hewitt is here, this I think will give you a good foundation for that. So if we could roll that clip, please.
In the Bible, Paul explains that everyone has two bodies, a physical body and a spiritual body. Mediums use their spiritual bodies when they act as a communication bridge between the physical and spirit worlds. As a spirit speaks, mediums hear the information using the ears of their spiritual bodies, then repeat the information to other physical people. Mediumship is synonymous with the biblical term Gifts of the Spirit. The focus of our show, Making Known the Unknown, is to provide knowledge through the use of Reverend Hewitt's mediumship and Sidney Schwartz's research. The Bible contains the history of psychic events, along with man-made doctrines created by priests centuries ago. This show will explore the untruths which the Bible entrenched into our society. By uncovering these untruths, we encourage people everywhere to think for themselves with a critical mind.
Okay, now that all of you have a sense of what it means to be a medium and receive communication from spirit as a medium, then you will have an understanding of what we refer to as communicating with spirit. Not to repeat myself, but throughout all of our shows, quite a bit of the information, if it is not researched by Sidney Schwartz, comes by way of mediumship through Reverend Hewitt. And both of those sources are valid. And both of those sources combined are what is making the truth be known to all of you out there. The title of tonight's show is The Emerald of the Universe. And I'm going to start by asking Reverend Hewitt a couple of questions. And it had occurred to me recently that you probably have multitudes of people coming to you, asking you questions, asking you the big questions. For example, as a pastor, I'm sure you've been asked many, many times, where is God? And more specifically, in our not too distant past, with respect to September 11th, where was God on that day? And have you, I'm sure, received calls with respect to that type of question?
Well, Tina, before I get into that question, I really would like to insert something here that's very important to the viewers pertaining to mediumship, and I think this is very important. Just as the Bible says, and just as I have learned over the years, and this is pertaining to the viewers, there's a lot of people out there that claim to be mediums, and they're not mediums. And this bothers me to know that there are people that's misleading other people, because we're dealing with something that's invisible. And because the world of spirit is invisible, just as the wind is invisible, just as the oxygen in this room is invisible, when the spirit body is invisible, when this physical body is no longer. And the people that communicate with me are invisible. And there are people out there that fake mediumship only to mislead those others just for the sake of the money. This bothers me. So I don't want people to be misled in this. Now, to answer your question was, I believe...
what do you tell people when they ask you about God? Where God is and
okay.
how God works?
God is where he or she has always been. God is within. Jesus tried to tell the people that God was within. When he was on the earth plane, and he said that he was going to the Father is within. If people really understood his teachings, he said that we have two bodies. We have a spirit body and we have a physical body. And that when he said, I'm going to the Father within me, he was going to the Father within. All of us have two bodies. And God is not in a piece of real estate in the sky. God is within ourselves. And since we have been taught that God is in a piece of real estate out there somewhere, the God that is within us is shut down. Our energy has been projected out there, not in here. And I learned the hard way. I learned to turn within. This is what he did. This is what the ascended masters did. They turned within. And if people would learn to do that, if you've been to my church, this is how you started yourself. Yes, there's a lot of people that come to me and they hesitate to ask the question because they don't quite know sometimes how to word it. And yet when you start thinking about it yourself, and if they take the book, the Bible, and they read it, and then they start understanding it, and you look within yourself, you'll start understanding what it's all about. It is very simple. That's where God is. God is where he or she has always been. In your case, she's within you. God is he within him. God is not an old man living in a piece of real estate in the sky. And when that person says God is on high, God is living in a higher rate of vibration, higher frequency. That's all there is to it. Yes.
I'm sure people have come to you and asked you where God was on September 11th. What have you told those people?
I say that God is exactly where he was all the time. God is within.
So God had nothing to do with what happened on September 11th. And there wasn't a God that could or would have protected people from some of that tragedy.
As I look back at the time, if people had not been misled by the many different religions, there would not have been any of these wars. And if people had not turned and followed all the ignorance and recycled ignorance, we would not have any wars. If people would only open their minds, look at all the brain matter, the gray matter that we have in our heads. We have cells up here in our brain that enabled us to heal other people. Why doesn't this work? Shut down. Shut down, it's asleep. Because when you take the ministers, the priests, the rabbis, and all of those religious people from the past, and they point their finger at you and say, that's the work of the evil one, and they put the fear in the minds of the people and get them to stop carrying out the gifts of the Spirit, that part of the brain shuts down. So today we live from birth to death with only about 10% of the brain working. Therefore, that part of the brain is not working anymore, you see? So we go from birth to death in ignorance. This is what it's all about. So the God within us is shut down, it's asleep. If we had a time machine and we were able to go way back, way back before the pyramids were ever built, you'd find out that the people lived thousands and thousands of years, and then they would ascend and go on into other dimensions. They did this simply because their brain was operating 100%. They didn't die. The body was never made to die. And it was created to live forever, and the reason it dies is because the brain was shut down because of the many belief systems. See, I don't believe in belief systems. I believe in a knowingness system.
Now, all of these people, thousands and thousands of years ago, whose brains shut down and died, didn't they all go to heaven? Where are they now?
They continued living in another dimension. In my Father's house are many dimensions. That's what Jesus said, but they changed his wording. They changed the wording to say, in my Father's house are many mansions. He didn't say that. They changed it. They changed it from dimensions to mansions, simply because the meeting was taking place in a mansion. There's a lot of people watching this program that are wondering why this picture here and this picture behind me. These pictures, as you know, were never created by any human hands. It was created by the gifts of the Spirit.
These were created by individuals who have died.
Yes.
And in the other dimension are
Right.
continuing their art
That's right.
and their work. And these people communicate with you,
That's right.
and they answer many questions for you.
There are other worlds, other dimensions beyond what we can see, whereas people are still living, carrying out the same gifts that they had when they were on the earth plane here. Still alive in another dimension.
Now, when you talk about other dimensions, I start thinking about other planets, other planetary systems. I start to wonder the age-old question, are we alone? Are we not alone? Naturally, the title of tonight's show, Emerald of the Universe, refers to planet Earth. But I understand that there's another explanation out there than what most of us have been accustomed to hearing in the history books and reading in the history books. Would you like to share some of that with us?
Heaven is a state of mind. It's not a place. It's a state of mind. As far as this planet is concerned, and it's called the Emerald of the Universe, is because there are other planetary systems. And what I'm telling the people tonight, it did not come from my mind, it did not come from another book, and no one on this planet ever told me. The entities from the other dimensions have taught me, because I turned my back on religions, and I went searching, because when I ever read in that book, the Bible, it says, ask and you shall receive, and knock and the door shall open, and I did exactly that. And if anybody would ever say they knocked the door down, well, I banged on that door, and I screamed and hollered I wanted some answers, and I got my answers. And it's only in the last few years that I got enough energy and enough, as some people said, guts, to come out on the stage of life, and I want to share it with other people. And because he appeared to me in these pictures, I decided, well, I'm going to do what he wants me to do, and that's exactly what I'm doing here. And with all the cards and the phone calls I'm getting from people, it's exactly what I'm doing. And there's a lot of people call me and say, you've got a lot of guts doing what you're doing. Well, I'm going to do it for the rest of my life, because there's a lot of people that's doing their own thinking, they're opening their mind, and I will help anybody as long as I'm here to do some thinking for themselves, because that's where God is, within ourselves. And I feel sorry for these people who have been led astray. And to watch the news just today, when this guy over there, Hussein, is saying that all of these people that have died, the Americans, they've instantly went to hell. What a terrible thing to say. Who is he to say that there's a hell and they've gone to hell? There is no such place. It's all man-made. There's no such thing as the devil. That makes me sick to hear that, because I asked him, the great teacher, is there such a thing? He said there is no such thing. He said that was created in the month of June in the year 325 at the Council of Nicaea. And he said there was a lot of stuff written about it. He says no such thing. And he said, and when they said that he was in the desert, he spent all the 40 days and 40 nights in the desert, he said he was there dealing with his own ego. He said, there's no such thing. It was all man-made.
Now, that would give our viewers an example of how one religion conflicts with another religion.
Exactly.
Naturally, if you're not believing and thinking the way that group would like you to believe and think, then obviously you're going to perish and go someplace else horrible. And of course, we don't need to go to the Middle East to have that experience or have that exposure or hear that message. We've got it right here in our backyard with different religious groups conflicting with each other all the time. And I find that sad. So let's get back to the Emerald of the Universe. Maybe Sidney could jump in on some of this, if you wanted to.
Before Professor jumps in here, the reason it's called the Emerald of the Universe, if anyone would take a look at the pictures that are being taken in the last few years from way out in space, when they look at our planet here, it really does look greenish in color. It does look like the Emerald of the Universe. But if we had a time machine and we could go way, 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 way back before the pyramids were built, the people that lived here then, they used all of this brain, every bit of it. They didn't die like we're dying today. They used all of their brain. And so when they got ready to leave here, what they did is they speeded up the vibration of the body and they ascended. And if they wanted to ascend, they went to other planetary systems. And there are even, in the Bible, there are even mention of people that, like Methuselah, he lived to be 969 years old. And what's his name?
Enoch.
Enoch lived to be...
I'm looking it up. It's just chapter 5 of the book of Genesis. Lists how old all these people were. Enoch lived 815 years, and after he became the father of Kenan and had other sons and daughters, so he was 850 years old when he first had children. And somewhere in here it talks about that and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. This line right here, verse 23 of chapter 5 of Genesis. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. This is just a fancy way to say that Enoch had his brain 100% open. He started constantly. He decided he wanted to ascend. He concentrated on his body. All the molecules of his body started to go faster and faster and faster. And it got to the point that it reached the speed of light. There was an explosion of light, and he went off to another universe. His body wasn't there anymore, and this is why they didn't see him. And this is why he said, and he walked with God, and he was not. And some other Bible says that he wasn't seen anymore. We don't know where he went. That's because, and the same thing happened with Elijah in the second book of Kings, in the fourth chapter, or second or fourth chapter, second chapter. Elijah tells his student Elisha that he's going to ascend. He doesn't use that word in the book because they've changed it. But then all of a sudden there's this fiery chariot, and he goes up in a whirlwind. It was the same thing. In those days, they didn't have helicopters, they didn't have airplanes. There was no way to explain how all of a sudden the body of Elijah, as he speeded it up, started to float in the air. So they said it was a flying chariot, because the gravitational pull no longer kept the body down, and he went up into the air, and he stayed there for a while, and his body was still going faster and faster. All of a sudden, when it reached the speed of light, it was a flash of light and an explosion. That's why it says a fiery chariot, because he saw the flash of light. And then he wasn't gone anymore, and all of a sudden his mantle, his clothing that he wore, fell to the ground, because obviously that remained in the physical world, while his body didn't. And he picked up that mantle and went on.
There's another thing too. When a person ascends, there's an explosion of energy, as he's explaining, and that person knows that and usually gets away from other people. This is why Elijah wanted Elisha, his student, not to come near him, because of that explosion, you see?
Okay.
This is why when Jesus came back into the tomb, went back into the body that was decaying, and he slowly speeded up the body and brought it back alive and kept right on going until such time that the body, there was an explosion that took place inside the tomb, and that explosion inside of that tomb is what blew that big stone away, you see? And in doing so, it caused the guards, which were all asleep, it woke them up, you see, and all they saw was this bright light inside, and they did not see anything that looked like a form of a body, you see? And so, but he had gone totally into light. It was ascension. And when you understand this, it becomes very simple. And way beyond that, there was a lot of people that ascended, but they would always get away. This is why in the book, through the ignorance of the writers, they would say, and he died of an old age. But they never would see somebody ascending. Very seldom. So they would never see them dying. They would always say, well, he died of an old age.
Okay.
That was their ignorance. They didn't know what was going on.
You know, what I'm visualizing, having come from the generation that I did, is something akin to Star Trek, when they would put the people in the transporter and their bodies would turn to little flecks of material, I suppose.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they would shoot off.
Yeah.
I mean, it would seem like if that were possible, and we really are playing around with that, but with TV movies now, it could be probable. And then another comment I had is if there are people who are dying on the earth plane, that's very different than people who ascend. So my question would be, what's the difference between where ascended people go and people who die go?
Back in the 70s, I think it was 77 or 78, Spirit told me that dying is abnormal.
Really?
Dying is abnormal. If our brain was operating 100%, then the body would never look over 30 years old. We could live as long as we wanted to, and if we decided that we wanted to leave this planet, we could go somewhere by ourselves and simply speed up the vibration of the body. Could you do it with the mind? Speed up the vibration of the body and ascend and go to any planetary system you wanted to go to. And they said that this is the only planetary system that have guns and bombs, because we're so ignorant. And it's all the religions that has caused the brain to shut down, and it's caused all these wars and all these people to suffer.
So now we really should be living to be about 800 or 900 years old.
You can live as long as you wanted to until you got bored with it and then ascend to someplace else.
Oh,
Yeah.
it was a choice.
It was your own choice, yes.
Okay, all right.
Awan explained to me that this is the only planet that you could come get a body, and that you needed a body in order to ascend to get to some of these other dimensions. This is why was part of the way the whole system was set up, so that you would come here, obtain a body, and then take that body to another dimension. To get back to your question, the difference between dying and ascension. In dying, well, you don't take your body with you into the next dimension. The body stays here and goes into the ground, and your spirit body ends up going into the other dimensions and into whatever level that it's achieved. When you ascend, you not only take your spirit body with you, you take your physical body with you as well. Those atoms are speeded up as we've explained before on the show, we actually have 7 bodies within us. So all 7 bodies go on to another dimension, to another vibration, all together in one unit.
All right. Well, I guess that leads me to the question of what's the point of Earth, our planet as it is now, if there are all these other great places that ascended entities can go to? What's the significance of Earth?
Big college, big school.
Earth is a school. How so?
To learn everything.
Okay.
But ignorance. It's turned into a school of ignorance here.
If there are other planetary systems, and people are living on those systems or in those systems, it kind of makes Earth seem sort of small and insignificant. And that kind of gets back to, I think, some of the basis of how we all thought the Earth came to be, which seemed to be the center of, or seems to be the center of the universe.
That's only from our perspective.
Okay.
This Earth that we live on, what we call the Earth, which was called for such a long time,
Terra?
yeah, Terra, T-E-R-R-I, Terra. It was called from a part of the sun. Billions of years ago, there was a terrible explosion of the sun. This is a part of the sun. It was thrown way off out in space, and it was spinning around so fast. And that the inside of the sun was thrown to the outside, the outer core, and it spun around for such a long time. And there was a big chunk of the inner core that, because of the gravitational pull on all directions, it stayed right in the middle. And after many, many, many years, it held right there. It held right there, and it became the sun for the inner core. In other words, this planet we're on is hollow.
It's hollow.
It's hollow. And there's people living inside this. Now, this may sound strange to a lot of people. They explained to me that this planet is hollow, and there are 3 entrances to it.
Okay, wait, you got to stop there.
I
got to back this up and slow it down.
I knew there would be.
Okay, so we had what sounded like the Big Bang Theory. Would that be fair?
Right, yes.
Okay. From that point on, however this sphere formed, it formed to be a hollow ball. So there's not magma and molten rock in the center of the Earth, like we all...
Well, there is in the outer core.
Oh,
Let's
I see.
say the outer shell.
So we've never gone deep enough.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
It's kind of like, you know, those chocolate-covered M&Ms with the peanut inside.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you can imagine the peanut not existing, and there's that open space in there,
Right.
because all the other stuff went where the chocolate is. The chocolate's all the magma and all that other stuff that's there, but the inside is hollow. Just like, you know, inside of a washing machine, when it goes spins around, all the clothes are on the edges of the machine, because it's spinning around. The centrifugal force forces what's inside to go to the outside. Well, the centrifugal force of this ball of the Earth forced all the magma to the outer portions, okay, and we're leaving a center that's hollow.
Like a centrifuge, I was thinking.
Takes a candy eater to explain it. Very good way to explain that.
So, okay, so we've got that. But then you jumped into 2 other things. There are people who live, or I'm not going to say people, but entities, beings that live on the inside of this planet.
Yeah, let me tie this together.
Okay. All right.
In 1945, when they dropped the atom bombs on Japan,
Right.
ended that horrible war. Then in 1946 or 47, they tested the hydrogen bomb, but instead of testing it on the surface, they went way down in the ground.
Okay.
I believe in Arizona, New Mexico.
Right.
And when they did that, they damaged the upper heavens of the inner world. Now, this sounds to some people crazy, but they explained to me what happened. The people on the inner core do have aeroships, and they came out of the opening, which was at that time one of the 3 openings, and I'll explain that in a minute.
Okay.
They came out of the opening up at the North Pole. They came out and they went to the outer edge of what is now, what's the state? New Mexico. New
Okay.
Mexico.
All right.
And they were checking up on what they call the idiots on the outer core. And it was there that they crashed with one of our Air Force, and there were 4 bodies that the U.S. Air Force has frozen. And the stories that happened at Roswell, New Mexico is true, but the government has been covering that up ever since. They don't, just like they don't want the people to know that they're involved in psychic phenomena and all of that. Well, they don't want the people to know about the UFOs and that type of thing. But those, and right now with all of these crop circles that we did, remember the program we did? They don't want people to know the truth about that either. But with the next few years, they're going to find out the truth, because those people from those other planetary systems, they're afraid of us because we got guns and bombs and all of that. They don't have that kind of equipment. They're afraid of us. They're not going to come here and be staring down the barrel of these guns and with these bombs and everything else.
You know, what's interesting is that I think the average person, after hearing what you just explained, taken out of context, would seem very strange. They might even say that, maybe there's a mental incapacity, and with all due respect, I think you know what I'm talking about. But somehow, when you tie this together with real life events and things that are happening every day that we know about, it really lends itself to the truth. It's quite believable.
We're not the only ones talking about this. If the viewers are interested, they can go on the internet and go to the Library of Congress and do a search with the word hollow in the title, and they'll find a book. I don't remember the exact title, but it's either The Hollow Earth or The Hollow Universe. It was written a while ago. Admiral Byrd, who went to the North Pole, he talked about exploring the North Pole, finding the hole that's up in the North Pole, and entering the inner world. And people had a hard time believing him too, but it's coming from many different sources.
Now, as I said before, there are 3 openings into the inner world.
All right.
One is in the place that we've heard so much about. It's called the Bermuda Triangle.
There's an entrance from the Bermuda Triangle to the center.
But it's only open ever so many years.
Okay. All right.
The Bermuda Triangle, and it is a true place, but I don't know how it works.
All right.
Now, there's another one at the South Pole,
Okay.
and there's one at the North Pole,
All right.
and the government knows about it too. And there's been some airplanes that has gone into this, and ships, and the
Perhaps we can turn this to show our viewers the area you're referring to as the Bermuda Triangle. There you go. I think we can see it now.
I was on an airplane. We were sitting on the tarmac in Miami. I was on my way to some island in the Caribbean, and the plane sat there for a long time. And I asked the stewardess, I said, "What are we waiting for?" And she says, "Well, we're waiting for a ship owner coming from New York going to Brazil." And I said, "Well, we've been there for a long time." Well, it turned out that his ship was docked in one of the Caribbean islands. And it turned out I was on this, it was in the plane where there was 2 seats on the side, 2 seats over there on the other window, and there was 3 seats in the middle. And the only seat left on the plane was right side of me. I think somebody in the other dimension planned this. And so he came along, he sat side of me. He finally came in, he had a whole roll of maps with him and everything else. And he had a little box. It turned out to be a thermostat for his ship. It was a refrigeration ship, and he was going to Brazil to buy beef for one of these hamburger companies. I'm not supposed to talk about that on the TV. And so anyway, he sat down and he started looking at the maps, and then he was telling me where his ship was, and it was not, the refrigeration system wasn't working, and so this unit he had to have. And so he was figuring out when the tides were best so that he could get the ship fixed, and then he would go on to Brazil. And I said, "Well, whereabouts are we right now?" And he told me on the map where it was, and I said, "My God, we're right in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle." Well, I'm not going to repeat what he said, not on the air here, but the moment he said that, we hit a pocket, and the plane dropped a good solid mile, and he did not have his seatbelt fastened, and he landed up on the roof.
Really?
Yes, he did, and he crashed down in the floor. I thought the man would have broken his neck. And he scrambled up and got back into the seat, and he looked at me and he said, "That was damn funny that I wound up on the ceiling the minute I said that word." Well, I almost said, I think you said the wrong thing, but I didn't. I just kept my mouth shut for a change. And so after that experience, I just knew that somebody's trying to tell him something, because he was a real scoffer, but yet we were right in the middle of that part of, and yet I think somebody was trying to tell me something too. We're right in the middle of that section there. And so I always stood in the back of my mind, the Bermuda Triangle. And I was told by Spirit, one of the Spirit teachers told me that this is truly one of the entrances to the inner world. And it was only after that that I saw on the TV where those planes in 1945, I believe it was, they were on maneuvers and they disappeared, and they went out on maneuvers and they disappeared, and they never figured out where they went to. There's also ships that disappeared out there. And I was told that the entrance opens up ever so many years, and there's ships that disappear. And then there's one at the South Pole. And it's very strange that there's some of the countries, the governments know about the one at the South Pole. They also know about the one at the North Pole too.
Wow. You just shared a lot with us. Now we all know, and we've seen factually, that there are ships that are disappearing. Ships, perhaps planes. I'm not sure how far it goes with respect to the Bermuda Triangle. And so my question would be, if they have disappeared, are they existing on the inner core?
Another thing too, what I would like to share with the viewers, this was in 1977 when the movie Encounters of the Third Kind came
Close
out.
Encounters, right?
I think you were up here at that time.
Yeah.
Everybody went to that movie
Yes.
from the church. I was told that the Spirit people influenced Spielberg to make the movie. He even had visions of this, and he made that movie. He made the movie because it was as close to the real thing as they possibly could create, and he was influenced by those in the other dimension. I went to see that, and I also bought the movie itself. They were trying their best to get that message to us here on the earth plane.
That sounds probable.
Sure.
Now they could be doing that with Star Wars. They could be doing that with other movies of that sort.
That's
as well.
right.
Okay.
And they said a lot of these things that we think is science fiction is closer to the truth than we can even imagine.
We're actually just moving closer to
Yeah.
that experience.
And the other thing that is very heavy is the fact that at one time, going way, way back, our planet was covered with clouds, absolutely covered with clouds, and we did not have oceans as we have them today. There was no oceans because the oceans itself, the water, was in the clouds.
Okay.
And that was when the dinosaurs was roaming the land. And the people that were here were being eaten by those dinosaurs. And they created laser light, and it was through the laser guns that they created that they got rid of, they started shooting the big mammals, shooting them through the head, and when they did that, the beams went right out into the clouds, and the heat from the beam, laser beams, caused the water in the clouds to come down, and that was the big floods that they had that you read about in the Bible.
Okay.
And it caused the water to come down that filled our oceans. And it was the first time anybody had ever seen the sun. They'd never seen the sun before.
So there was a time when this planet had no sun.
That's right. And that this planet and Venus are twins. And today Venus is still covered with clouds.
Really?
Isn't that interesting?
So Venus is what we used to look like
Absolutely.
at some point.
Absolutely. The scientists tell us today that Venus is still covered with clouds.
Really. But for whatever reasons, this planet was chosen to be the school, as you
The
said.
womb,
The womb.
as they say.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I've gotten many lessons. That was so heavy. But when I went out into the woods away from people, and I'd hear a familiar voice, sound like an old man talking. He spoke very clear English. I'm not going to say it was him, I'm not sure. But he would give me these long lessons. I'm sorry I didn't step out on the platform and teach before now. But I was kind of afraid to do that.
One of the thoughts that I had is we're talking about ascended masters here. And ascended masters going to other planetary systems, and ascended masters riding in spaceships or vehicles of that sort. Is ascended master synonymous with alien? Is
Yeah.
that really what we're talking about here?
Well, I guess so. The other thing I forgot to mention, the fact that the people living on the world, on the inside, they have large eyes because their sun, which does not set or rise, it stays in one place. It's a smoky blue in color, and it's not as bright as our sun. And that the people's skin is bluish. It's a smoky blue color. And this is why their eyes are much bigger, because they can't deal with our bright sun. They have to wear glasses because our sun is extremely bright. And this is why their eyes are so much bigger. And their bodies are smaller. And they're very advanced, way ahead of us. And they're very, very advanced. And they don't burn fossil fuel.
Really?
They fly on a highway of light. They shoot a beam of light, and their airship follows that beam of light. And they told me that our government has that same formula. And I remembered 1991 when we were having that war in the desert.
Right, the Gulf War.
They told me to watch the show, watch the program, and I remember watching it. And I told you about that.
Yep.
The bomber. One of the bombers went over and they shot a beam of light. I remember it very well. I could see a hangar, and you could see they shot a beam of light at the door of the hangar, and then the guy pressed the button, and they call him the smart bomb. That smart bomb followed the beam right to the door, right to that target where that beam of light went. They call them smart bombs. In other words, the bomb followed the beam of light.
Right.
And after that, they would never show that again because the government did not want the people to know it. In other words, they don't want us to know that they have this technology because they would wonder why. Why can't we have this for our cars, our buses,
Sure.
trucks?
Right.
Nobody's going to make any money on following a highway of light. Nobody's going to make any money on that.
You know what I find interesting after having known you only for a very short time? It's interesting, it's exciting, it's nerve-wracking. Both you and Sidney share information with myself and other people and the viewers. And then this information comes to be proven by the scientific community because unfortunately, most of our viewers, unless they can touch it and see it and feel it, they don't believe it.
Oh, no.
But it's very gratifying to me, and I'm sure it is to you personally, that when these things come to play by the scientific community, by experts and researchers throughout the world, to me it only lends itself to the fact that where you're coming from is truth. And it's not hokey, and it's not a game. It's very real.
Right. Carl, why don't you tell the viewers of the story about what happened to you when you were a child and your mother with the beans, with the neighbor lady?
Oh, God. I'll tell it, but this is a story that... Anyway, I was born and raised on a farm, and I guess I was around 5 years old. It was in the month of May, I know that, because at that time, we grew all of our food and everything else. And my mother, it was string beans, I think. Yeah, string beans. And my mother and Miss Abby, down there, everybody called the first, like you, your Tina, it would be Miss Tina.
Right, right.
And they had gone to the garden and picked all these beans. And they had big wash tub full of beans, sitting on the porch and getting them ready to can them for the winter. And I was sitting over here in the swing, and they were sitting over here. And the other kids were going to school, because it was probably the last end of the school, I think. And the road went by the house was a dirt road, going down to the end of the peninsula. And I looked over, and there was sort of a knoll, and at the top of this knoll, there was a fire tower at one time, because it was the highest spot around there. And that tower had been taken down, and there was these three entities. Is that what you're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
These three entities that were coming down this path, coming down towards me. I'd seen them before. They had visited with me before, and but they had big eyes and little tiny mouth. And their clothes, if you want to call it that, looked like didn't have any seams in them. And they were very small people. And they were coming down towards me, but Mama and Miss Abby, their backs were sort of towards them, so they wouldn't have seen them. But as they crossed that road and got halfway from the road to the house, they must have done something to control my mother's mind and Miss Abby's mind. And they must have taken over my mind, because the next thing I remembered, I was between those three people. In other words, there was two of them behind me and one of them in front of me, and I was following them up that path. And then I got up to the top of the hill. There was this spaceship that was there that looked like a bullet, like a well, if you know what a bullet for a .22 rifle looks like. Mm-hmm. Well, it looked like an enormous one. You know, it would fit in this whole room.
Okay.
Probably stand 40, 50 feet high. And it would look like it was made out of aluminum or stainless steel. And I remember as we came close to it, and it was absolute silent, this tongue, or whatever you call it, slid out like this, and then we walked right up. And we walked right up. I had to follow this one person, these two behind me, and I went up, and as I looked back, it was like going into a laboratory.
Really?
And I don't know what they did to me. Were they controlling my mind? I don't remember them giving me any shots or anything. And then the next time I remembered anything, I was sitting by a porthole. I was sitting like here. I felt as if I was strapped in, but there was a porthole in front of me, and I saw the planet way down there somewhere. And it was then that I was coming out of this daze that I was in, and I was crying. I didn't want to be there. And then the next thing I remember, I was back here somewhere on a table. That it reminded me of being in a room where the table would be metal, like you would see at a veterinarian hospital, see. And I don't know what they were doing to me there, but then I wound up in that same chair or same seat, still looking at the earth, but I felt as if I was closer to it. And then a little while later, I was back there. They were leading me out of this thing, And then I was walking back towards the house, and we were walking across the road, and the next thing I remember, I was sitting back in the swing, and I remember my mother saying, "My God, Miss Abby, look where the sun is." She was not wearing a watch. I don't think she even had a watch. And she got up and went in the house to check the clock. She had one of them old big clocks, you know.
Right.
And she says, "You realize what time it is? It's 3:45. And we haven't got these beans done. We should have these beans done 2 hours ago." So they must have been put in a daze or a sleep or a trance or something. And all that time was wasted. And they kept talking about it all afternoon, that they got nothing done. And I don't know how long it was after that that I saw those I don't know what to call them. I didn't want to call them men, or I felt like calling them creatures, coming. And I started crying, and I said to Mama, "Don't let them take me. Don't let them take me." She didn't know what I was talking about because she couldn't see them.
Right, but you could see them.
I could see it. And I remember becoming hysterical, but she couldn't see them. And I really thought she was lying to me, because they were just as real as these cameras are in this room.
And how old were you during this time, would you say?
I was not quite old enough to go. I remember going to school the next year. That was when all that stuff started.
Okay.
Didn't those same entities come see you in that school, and they would take you and have you tell stories?
Yes, they were the ones that took me up on the stage in the first week of school.
Okay, you've talked about that in the show. Okay.
Yeah.
That must have been something for you.
Oh, it was horrible.
So, you know, what you're describing to me, and you're not a farmer out in the middle of a field in Nebraska. You are an educated man. I consider you an educated man. And, of course, you were a child at the time. And this experience has happened to you then, and it's happened to you, I'm guessing, not too long ago either. Or you've had this experience where you've been able to see entities, creatures, what have you, of all sorts. And this is a very believable story. But what I'm thinking of is this comparable to what we would call abductions? Is this the the stuff that we see on the X-Files?
Well, something must have been happening, Tina, because of the fact that the county nurse came and got me and took me to city to have my ears and eyes tested. Something must have been happening that was obvious to other people, wouldn't you say?
Right.
I guess.
And then they took me to Duke University 2 weeks after that, and they couldn't get any doctors to give a report that there was anything wrong with my ears or eyes. So from there on, I was an outcast, along with my friend Dixie.
When do you think people are finally going to accept this? What do you think it's going to take before people will realize that we are not the only entities on this planet, or in this solar system, or this universe?
Well, didn't I explain to you on one of the programs, I don't know, back last summer about this young woman down here at in Norwich Hospital?
Yes.
All right. Didn't I do that on one of the other programs?
Yes. Yes.
Well, that was very sad. She was put in that hospital down here at 19 years old, and she stayed there till she died.
Right.
And she was a medium. She had a lot of experiences like this, and she was
did?
put there by the priest and her parents. And she was nothing but a genuine medium.
Right. Right.
That was the saddest thing, one of the saddest things I had to deal with around here.
You talked about Jehovah being an ascended master, going into another area, or a godlike person.
Well, he was just a bad god. That's all it was.
As far as I know, Jehovah never was in a body, so therefore he couldn't ascend.
Okay. Okay. So I'm confusing two things here, but in other words, there are still entities out there.
Yes.
Whatever you want to call them, and they're watching us, and they're sending us messages via crop circles, and they're communicating with us all the time.
And you want to explain to us that these ascended masters and originally came in and they influenced our genetics to help speed us along, to help us advance a lot faster than we would have normally.
That's very interesting. We only have a few minutes left in the show, but let me try to get the gist of that. How would they do that? Would they? Well,
they must understand the genome that we're just discovering right now, and they probably played around with it to make it happen faster than it would just on its own through regular evolution.
Okay, so they're aiding us. We have an interface going on here, whether we know it or not, with respect to science, maybe technology, and other areas. But I guess for our skeptical viewers, that has yet to be proven. And until they can touch it, feel it, and hold it, I guess all that we're saying is probably just nonsense to them. But that's okay. I'm not afraid of that. I've got time. I can wait for that to be seen. And in the meantime, we'll be miles and years ahead of them for knowing that. And our viewers will be too.
Yes. Edgar Cayce was one of the great, he was called the sleeping prophet. He would go into a trance and he would be telling people many things. There's a lot of books out there about him. But when he was on the earth plane and he was trying to teach the people, he had two places that they mysteriously burned down because the people, the ignorant people, and especially the clergy, they had him burned down because they did not want people to listen to what he had to say. It was very sad. He was a very good man. He was the healer, the sleeping prophet.
I know. I've heard of Edgar Cayce. Wow, we covered a lot of territory tonight. Unfortunately, I have to wrap the show up now. I think we could just go on and on and on. This could be a 2-hour show.
We were just getting warmed up.
Yes, we were. I want to remind our viewers about this wonderful book that Sidney Schwartz and Reverend Hewitt have co-authored. My First Encounter with an Angel, Revelations of Ancient Wisdom. You can call the number at the end of the show to purchase this book if you'd like it. If you have any questions with respect to our show, you can call the number at the end. You could also tune into or send messages to our email address, making_known@yahoo.com. And as always, thank you, Sidney Schwartz and Reverend Carl Hewitt.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
And thank you, viewers. Until next time, be well.